on YouTube. And I'd like to welcome all of you to the sixth session of the ECPS virtual workshop series, We, the People, and the Future of Democracy, Interdisciplinary Approaches. This online series follows EPS's in-person conference at Oxford University in July 2025 and continues the vital discussions initiated there. My name is Ilhan Kaya. I'm actually currently a remote scholar with Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada. I was a postdoc at Ghent University before that, and before that I was a professor at Yıldız Technical University in Turkey. I received my PhD and master's from Florida State University in human geography. I study issues of identity, place, migration, minority politics, and politics of identity. And my focus has been on Turkish immigration to the United States and Muslim immigrants in the West, as well as non-Muslim minorities in Turkey, the Kurds, also ethnic minorities and religious minorities in Turkey as well. And ECPS creates this virtual workshop series to address one of the most pressing questions of our time. The idea of people shapes the fate of democracy by examining how the people can sword tool of authoritarian consolidation. This series fosters interdisciplinary dialogue to understand democratic backsliding and resilience and the future of democracy globally. Today, we convene the session of the series titled Populism and the Crisis. This session brings together scholars from diverse theoretical and regional backgrounds to interrogate how contemporary populist and authoritarian and nativist projects contest and configure the meaning of representation. The panel examines how the people is invoked, constructed, mobilized across different institutional and cultural contexts, whether through discursive performances, sociological disruptions, or reconfiguration of democratic institutions. Drawing on the cases from Latin America, Europe, and the Global South, the papers explore how populist actors challenge existing mechanisms of accountability, reshape public legitimacy, and reveal the fragilities of representative democracy. As a testament to its commitment to knowledge dissemination, ECPS is going to write a workshop report and share this video of this event on the website, its website and YouTube channel. With this, I introduce our distinguished presenters, discussants for today's session. First speaker is Dr. Jonathan Madison, and he's going to discuss the de-exceptionalization democracy, rethinking established and emerging democracies in changing world. Dr. Madison is a historian and political analyst specializing in democratic states. He holds a PhD in global and imperial history from the University of Oxford, where his research focused on the 20th century democracy in Brazil. Dr. Madison is currently a governance fellow at the R Street Institute, where he researches and advocates for election reforms aimed at improving candidate quality and political incentives. He also provides analysis on political risk, foreign policy, and democratization. Additionally, Dr. Madison is a part-time history instructor at Brigham Young University. Our second speaker is Dr. It's a long name, sorry, Dr. Carvalho, Hoya Mauro Gomes Vieira de Carvalho will be our second speaker, presenting the topic on mobilizing for disruption, a sociological interpretation of the role of populism in the crisis of democracy. Dr. Carvalho is a Brazilian social scientist. He earned his PhD in social sciences in 2019 at the State University of Sao Paulo, where he also taught political theory. He is a member of the Research Committee of Sociological Theory at the International Sociological Association and a researcher at LabPol, UNESCO, and the Gap Critical Theory, culture and education. Currently, he is researching populism and political authoritarianism, focusing on emergence of new relevant form of online mobilization, as well as the of the on democracy. And our third, Dr. Arbus and Peter Mayer's theoretical perspectives on politics and democracy. Dr. Zamfira is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Bucharest and associate researcher at the Regional Center for Advanced Francophone Studies in Social Sciences and a member of Studia Politica, Romanian Political Science Review, and Studia Securitatis. Her research interests focus on democracy studies, competing conception of democracy, party democracy, transnationalization, and de-democratization of politics, and ethnic studies, nation building, nationalism, national minorities, and national ethno-cultural identities and politics of identity. The fourth and last presentation is not going to be done, and Dr. Duffin is not going to be with us today. And let me also introduce our last two our discussants, Dr. Amir Ali and Dr. Amedeo Varriale. Each will have 12 minutes of commentary and feedback. Dr. Amir Ali has been a faculty member at the Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, since 2007. He has authored two books, South Asian Islam and British Multiculturalism, and Brexit and Liberal Democracy, Populism, Sovereignty, and the Nation State. His areas of teaching, research, and writing are political theory, multiculturalism, group rights, British politics, and political Islam. His work has been published in journals such as Economic and Political Weekly, Ethnic and Racial Studies, and the Journal of Human Values. His regularly written political commentary on Indian and global politics has appeared in multiple news outlets. And finally, Dr. Amedeo Varriale earned his PhD from the University of East London in March 2024. His research interests focus on the contemporary populism and nationalism. During his academic career, Dr. Varriale contributed a research assistant to a development of a significant textbook project on the global resurgence of nationalism titled The New Nationalism in America and Beyond, co-authored by Robert Schatzer and Eric Taylor Woods. He has written for ECPS before, but he has also been published by other academic outlets, ranging from the Journal of Dialogue Studies to Wells Crossing Conceptual Boundaries. And currently, he is also an affiliated researcher for the Center for the Study of Global Nationalisms. As a reminder, we will have a question and answer session after the completion of all the presentations and discussants' feedback. The participants can write their questions in the chat box or by raising their virtual hand and pose their questions in person. And thank you so much. And I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Madison as our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let me go ahead and make sure I can share this with you. Everybody can see that, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So yeah, I'm presenting my paper today. It went through a bit of some slight changes as I produced it, and so today it is de-exceptionalizing democracy, rethinking established and emerging democracies in an age of liberal backsliding. So thank you everybody for taking the time to come and to share our papers together. I'm really looking forward to it and to the feedback that you can have. Looking at the current global phenomenon of democratic backsliding, my paper conducts a comparison between Brazil and the United States of America. Since at least the end of World War II, the United States has widely been considered a paragon of liberal democracy. Brazil, like many countries in Latin America, has struggled to achieve democratic stability over that same period and endured a period of military dictatorship from 1964 to 1985. Both Brazil and the United States feature quite heavily in recent literature concerning democratic backsliding over the last several years, especially as it pertains to the presidencies of Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro. Yet, today, it is Brazil, the would-be developing or emerging democracy, that seems to have weathered the storm successfully. As democratic backsliding continues to reach alarming new highs in the United States, Brazil has constrained and punished anti-democratic actors. My paper has three key findings, as you can see here. First, while analyzing the recent episodes of democratic backsliding in these two countries, Brazil's institutions, as I stated, have demonstrated resilience, where their counterparts in the United States have failed or performed poorly. Two, in these cases, liberal institutions, not democratic ones, determined resilience against populist authoritarian actors. And then three, finally, these cases suggest that the differentiation between established or consolidated democracies and emerging democracies or developing democracies is not really a valid predictor of democratic resilience in this current wave of backsliding. So, just some context of the paper and the research as I carried it out. First, I felt it was important, as I just stated, to differentiate between democratic and liberal institutions, something that I feel doesn't always come through in some of the literature on democratic backsliding. And so, yeah, with democratic institutions, we're talking about regular elections, political parties, voting procedures, liberal institutions, independent courts, separation of powers, legislatures, oversight agencies, and constitutional safeguards for individual rights. This is a narrow political interpretation. You could obviously add a lot of institutions like the press and different things, but for this purpose, I wanted to keep it more narrow for the comparison's sake. So, looking at the most recent literature on democratic backsliding, there tends to be two prevailing hypotheses. The first is the delivery hypothesis. This school of thought holds that democratic regimes have failed in recent years and decades to deliver meaningful socioeconomic results to their citizenry. This has led to citizens seeking out anti-democratic alternatives that they believe can produce these results. Common examples include declining levels of industrialization and weak border enforcement in the United States, as well as high levels of crime and widespread corruption in Brazil, in addition to just low or failing economic growth. On the other hand, you have institutional explanations, which focus on the way executive power expands and is personalized as norms and organizations fail to constrain it or loopholes are exploited. Crucially, for my paper, a lot of this institution-focused literature has highlighted that many leaders in backsliding countries, Bolsonaro and Trump included, did not campaign on anti-democratic platforms. Instead, they held themselves up as popular crusaders against many of the problems that delivery literature highlights. And so this is where populism, the theme of our conference, becomes particularly relevant. Because Bolsonaro and Trump did not decry democracy or attack democracy. Instead, they've weaponized it. They claimed large, imagined popular mandates and insisted that they embodied the will of the people that had somehow been made manifest in their elections. In this sense, democracy was not the target. Instead, it was liberal institutions and political actors who would constrain the will of the people. And so, in that sense, it is not the failure to deliver didn't lead to anti-democratic attitudes, but it led to these populist authoritarian leaders who would weaponize democracy against itself, essentially. While this paper largely sides with institutional explanations, it does so with two key caveats. First, as we've seen, it's crucial to separate democratic from liberal institutions and understand that it's the latter that has been under attack in many of these cases. And second, that those institutions are not self-executing, but instead rely on the political actors who compose them to animate them. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about this divide that I've brought up several times between established and emerging democracies. For the latter part of the 20th century and into the 21st, a large share of political analysis has emphasized the difference between established or consolidated democracies and emerging or developing democracies. There's been a large focus on so-called third wave democracies that emerged, after 1970 that have been considered separately from what were supposed to be consolidated democracies in North America, Western Europe, and elsewhere. These third wave or emerging democracies were seen as fragile and susceptible to challenges that consolidated democracies had evolved beyond and no longer confronted. This paper, however, shows that issues such as populism, corruption, and authoritarian threats that have long been associated with Latin American democracies like Brazil have found new life in some of the world's most would-be consolidated democracies, including the United States. The assumption, therefore, that more consolidated democracies would be better prepared to weather this storm of democratic backsliding is incorrect, and it may even be the case that the inverse could be true. In considering these two cases, Brazil and the United States, it's important for me to see how executive power was constrained while Bolsonaro and Trump were in office, and how the system punished anti-democratic actions after they left office. And so I wanted to look at both aspects. And so there are a lot of key things that are true in both the cases of Bolsonaro and Trump that I have put out here. And so if we look first at the United States, In the United States, Trump came to power in the 2016 election by projecting himself as a champion of the forgotten working class. And so, again, not with an anti-democratic message. He led attacks on so-called globalist elites who were failing on matters of immigration and meaningful economic growth. Once in power, he made frequent use of the presidency and executive power, issuing hundreds of executive orders and frequently attempting to bypass Congress while assuming quasi-legislative power in the presidency. In his first term, Trump also attempted to disrupt the rule of law by pressuring his Department of Justice to investigate his political opponents and also trying to disrupt or obstruct investigations of himself and his own conduct. Some of Trump's worst abuses of executive power in that first term were eventually rolled back either by the US Supreme Court or never went into effect because they were impeded by members of his own administration who simply refused to do certain things. However, Trump continued to expand executive authority by blatantly expanding on some of the excesses of his predecessors and simply ignoring democratic norms that he didn't wish to follow. When it seemed like he might lose in the 2020 election, Trump actively sought to delegitimize that election process. He spread misinformation about election fraud. Once it became clear that he had in fact lost, Trump continued to spread conspiracy theories and pressured state officials to try and change the election results. His efforts, of course, culminated in the January 6th, 2021 attack on the US Capitol by his own supporters. Congress, in that case, acted to impeach Trump, which was actually his second impeachment. They had done that while he was in office for different reasons, yet in both instances, partisan loyalty rendered that process toothless and ensured that it posed no real threat to him. A congressional investigation of the events of January 6th also produced damning evidence before partisan politics again nullified any potential consequences from that investigation. After Trump left office, we see again many similarly weak institutional responses. Courts actively avoided disqualifying Donald Trump under the 14th Amendment, which bars public officials who engage in insurrection from holding office. And the Supreme Court issued an overly expansive ruling on presidential immunity, which further weakened accountability. Other court proceedings against Donald Trump's actions while in office proved too slow to be effective. In public, the attempts to hold Trump accountable often had the effect of increasing his popularity among his base. Trump employed populist language, demonizing those institutions, those liberal institutions trying to hold him accountable, telling his supporters, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in the way. And so again, presenting himself as this personification of popular will. Emboldened by this spate of impunity, I should say, Trump's second term has been characterized by more aggressive and direct attacks on liberal institutions and norms. Since returning to power, he has framed domestic opposition as an existential threat and made excessive use of the military internally without authorization or justification. He has used federal agencies to target political opponents, from individuals to universities. He has also issued executive orders unilaterally reinterpreting the Constitution and using those same executive orders and very questionable national emergencies to legislate from the White House and bypass Congress, even going as far as to raise taxes and use military force on foreign targets without congressional authorization. Trump's second term so far has illustrated the escalating consequences of that institutional weakness that was displayed in the United States. So if we look at Brazil on the other side of that, Bolsonaro came to power in 2019 after a campaign where he cast himself as a national savior to deliver the country from communism or the left. He lambasted the Brazilian left as solely responsible for corruption, crime, and poor economic performance, and vowed to root it out. As president, Bolsonaro, like Trump, also tried to govern extensively via executive power, primarily through what in Brazil is called medidas provisórias, or provisional measures. Bolsonaro also used many levers of power for his personal gain. He sought to politicize law enforcement. He pressured the federal police force into avoiding investigations of his family. Throughout his presidency, Bolsonaro used rallies and allusions to his supposed popular mandate to attempt to intimidate the other branches of government. He frequently used rally speeches to demonize Brazil's top court, the Supreme Federal Tribunal. At one point, Bolsonaro insisted it was incumbent upon members of the court to fall in line with his agenda, and even declared, "I truly am the Constitution," at one of these rallies. And yet Brazil's institutions proved far more resilient. The previously mentioned provisional measures or executive actions that Bolsonaro took expire in Brazil if Congress does not act on them to approve them. Many of Bolsonaro's measures were allowed to expire, and several others were heavily amended or mitigated before taking effect. The Supreme Federal Tribunal also frequently acted to constrain executive excesses, which is what drew Bolsonaro's ire and rage towards them. As the 2022 election approached, Bolsonaro mimicked tactics applied by Trump in the United States, insisting that any loss by him could only be produced by fraud. He frequently derided Brazil's electronic voting system without producing any evidence. In this case, it was Brazil's unique electoral justice system that pushed back by opening investigations into election-related disinformation and publicly reaffirming the integrity of the electronic voting system. Bolsonaro's attempts to illegally cling to power after his defeat were thwarted by the efforts of this electoral justice system, as well as the refusal of key actors in Congress and the military to endorse extra-legal paths to remaining in power. After Bolsonaro stepped down, Brazil's courts and prosecutors moved much more swiftly to impose accountability. In mid-2023, the electoral system barred Bolsonaro from seeking office for another 10 years, finding that he had used the powers of the presidency to arouse a state of collective paranoia around the election. In 2024, prosecutors went further, indicting him for conspiring to subvert the election results through a military coup. This marked a watershed moment. For the first time in Brazilian history, coup plotters had been held accountable for their actions. Bolsonaro denounced all of these political proceedings as persecution, but those claims failed to resonate as widely as they had in the United States under Trump. So why this discrepancy in results between Brazil and the United States? So I find a few key things I believe that are crucial in explaining this discrepancy. In some cases, institutional design proved key. As we discussed, Brazil's provisional measures do grant a degree of lawmaking ability to the president, but it's only temporary and it requires Congress to act. In the United States, by contrast, executive orders and national emergencies are open-ended tools of unilateral presidential action. Congress, if it wants, can simply avoid getting involved, and the legal process for addressing these issues can be quite slow. The difference in party systems also seems to be quite key. In the United States, a rigid two-party system has devolved into a siege mentality where many institutions, especially Congress, are unwilling to provide meaningful accountability against someone in their own party. And because of the way those executive powers work, they have the ability to simply remain uninvolved. Brazil, on the other hand, has a highly fragmented party system, which allowed Brazilian political actors, even those on the right, to remain a much higher degree of independence vis-a-vis Bolsonaro and his actions. In this case, in some cases, that meant opposing Bolsonaro or simply just distancing themselves from him and not providing him with the support he needed in Congress and other institutions. The nature of the legal systems, Brazil's civil law and the United States common law legal system lead to quite disparate outcomes. The Brazilian Supreme Federal Tribunal is empowered to act as a defender of the Constitution, and it can do so preemptively whenever the Constitution is threatened. However, in the United States, courts can only rule in the context of an actual case or controversy under the.
Jonathan, I just like to remind you that we are actually over time.
Oh, okay.
Just to mind you, wrap up actually the talk. Thank you.
Yep, almost done. Thank you. Yeah, and so the United States requires has a much higher bar for court involvement. Brazil benefits in this case from a much more recent and strong memory of dictatorship, which has heavily influenced its constitutional design, that the United States obviously does not share. And conversely, the United States relies on largely unwritten norms to safeguard its democracy that have not been codified in law as they have in Brazil, which has led to norms that can be more easily ignored. And I'll just leave off by talking that, from what we've seen in Brazil, this has been a successful experience, but there is a danger of an overactive judiciary that can in turn threaten liberalism itself as it becomes overactive in suppressing legitimate political dissent. And then finally, that the paper and this comparison really highlighted for me the importance of liberal institutions over for determining the survival of democracy, regardless of the level of development or consolidation. And so I will leave that with you, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I'd just like to proceed with the second speaker, Dr. Carvalho. His talk is Mobilizing for Destruction, a Sociological Interpretation of the Role of Populism in Crisis of Democracy. Dr. Carvalho, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to share my work here with you. I hope my English will be enough good for you to understand what I'm speaking. So I wrote a very short text and will read it because of not so fluent in English. And I will make some commentaries as I go reading the text. So I'm interested in populism as a sociological phenomenon that plays a decisive role in the crisis of democracy, a crisis that I am to be structural. So my interest is primarily the crisis of democracy, meaning the changes that the system is going through nowadays, potentially. Populism is a part of that crisis, and they play with the crisis in my point of view. So that's the main theme of my ongoing research project. So the question is to understand why people follow the populist leader. What's the meaning of the populist discourse that convinces the people to adhere? That's the main question. Why people adhere to the populist leaderships? How does the populist leader elaborate on the contradictions of modern democracy, interpreting and mobilizing public discontent to give it meaning? I will explore the problem drawing upon a sociological framework. I will very short speaking about that idea of the contradictions underlying modern democratic system to try to draw a framework to frame the phenomenon of populism and populistic mobilization. So I'm especially interested here in populist leadership that I understand to be disruptive. That's the case of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. In my point of view, it's also the case of Donald Trump in the United States and of Javier Milei in Argentina. I will not speak about that disruptive content of the discourse, but that's primarily what I'm thinking here as the main type of, or more dangerous type of populist discourse nowadays in Western democracies. And so they are trying to shape the change of the system, democratic system. So first, I assume that the modern democratic system lies upon a contradiction between normative aspirations and systemic functions. The normative ambitions are based on the historical liberal claim of spreading equality, freedom, and solidarity. That's the trinity of the French Revolution. Those normative claimings clash with the reality of a mass democratic system constructed on the economic basis of capitalism. This economic system, capitalism, operates through competition and the pursuit of particular interests, thereby perpetuating and reproducing inequality. So they clash with the normative aspiration. That contradiction is structural and cannot be solved by mere will. Historically, as Klaus Hofer argued in the 1980s, the combination of welfare state policies and competitive party politics helped to stabilize the contradiction. So regulation, economic regulation by welfarism and party competition could stabilize that contradiction in the middle of the 20th century. Economic deregulation and the emergence of new political actors, such as new social movements, threatened to destabilize it. That was the diagnostics of Klaus Hofer in the 1980s. The economic deregulation would destabilize the economic regulations that made it possible to mediate the contradiction between economic competitiveness and democratic politics. The deregulation would destabilize it, and so the new political actors, political movements that don't act by the logic of the competitive party. So that's the sociological diagnostic underlying my paper. The interpretation of political crisis in the 1980s gives us some categories to understand the current crisis. Primarily the crisis that's provoked by the economic crisis of 2007, 2008, that is often considered to be one of the main causes of the current crisis. So that's make that diagnosis of Klaus Hofer more actual in my point of view. Populist leaders are here to be considered a type of charismatic leader who interpret the contradictions, giving meaning to them within a community. That's a concept of charismatic leadership by German sociologist Ulrich Oevermann. That's how he interprets the concept of Max Weber from charismatic leadership. So charismatic leader is the one that interprets the contradictions and the crisis within a community, a political community. So producing meaning and then orienting the people, mobilizing the people according to their ideas. Thus, the second problem, the emergence of digital media, which disorganizes the public sphere. social digital media have an effect such as that of economic dysregulation and emergence of new social movements. They disorganize, destabilize the public discourse, the public sphere. They enable the leader to communicate directly with the people without intermediaries, such like immediate communication. That immediacy is illusory, as we're aware of how the platforms already constitute a form of mediation and that algorithm determines their structure, but they give the illusion of immediacy, of a immediate communication between the populist leadership and the public, the people. And that's important because populist, in my point of view, and that's my point here, they try to mobilize people against the institutions that function as political mediation. That's my object, so to say. So they aren't, however, a mediation like the legacy media and its mechanisms of gatekeeping. Legacy media, traditional media, had some safeguards, some mechanisms of gatekeeping that wouldn't enable some kinds of discourse to have a bigger public in society. Digital media made it possible and thus facilitates the way populists can mobilize the people against the institutions. That's the some kind of thesis here. Therefore, the restructuring of the public sphere by digital media is one more factor of destabilization, a factor that Klaus Offe couldn't foresee in the 98. It's very recently. They facilitate mobilization by populist leaders, and so populist leadership can interpret the contradictions, interpret the crisis, and try to give a meaning to it, mobilizing people in that direction. That's, in short, my argument here. The idea, just to, it's not in the paper, but it's worth noting that that is a project that I'm starting with the project, the research project. So I'm trying primarily to draw that framework to do empirical research. In my case, qualitative empirical research based on case analysis, case studies. But I think that framework can also be used in another kinds of empirical research. Important for me is that empirical research should be made to understand the phenomenon of populist and proto-authoritarian leaderships. So my goal is to investigate the mediations of the system, especially those of communication, that transformation of the media, of the public sphere, and communication between leadership and the people. What also means transformation of the political parties. I think the most interesting case in that sense is that of the five-star movements in Italy, which claims to make politics or make policy upon direct interpretation of the will of the people through social networks, so social digital media. So that's what I'm interested in. And thus understand the crisis and how it's elaborated and mobilize the people. I'm also working with an idea of crisis here that is also structural, a structural crisis, and that should be understood as a moment, something like a moment of truth, a moment of change, a moment in which change, transformation can occur, but the meaning, the sense of that transformation is opened, so it can means more democracy or more authoritarianism or something different. We don't know yet what is to come, but the moment is a moment of potential disruption. So the interest to investigate populist discourse is to see how they try to operate with that moment of possible transformation, possible change. So the goal of the research is to investigate how populist leadership uses the internet to promote the kind of supposedly immediate democracy. The time doesn't allow for a full case reconstruction, so I will present a short example. The chant of Bolsonaro supporters gathered in front of Brazil's seat of government, protesting Brazil's Supreme Court, the Supremo Tribunal Federal. The gathering took place in the context of a general election in which Lula defeated then President Bolsonaro. Foreseeing his defeat, Bolsonaro and his allies spread mistrust against the electoral procedure and the electoral authority, the Electoral Court, Tribunal Superior Eleitoral, which is always presided by a justice of the Supreme Court. So they mobilized the people against the institutions, including the Supreme Court, based on this mistrust they spread through digital media. It's worth noting that Brazil have electoral court. I know that's not so common in other countries, but we have one, and the president of that court is always a justice of our Supreme Court. So the supporters of Bolsonaro screamed, "Get out, justice supremes the people." Very short interpretation of that slogan, "Get out, justice supremes the people." That slogan is very interesting for me because it synthesizes, so to say, what I'm meaning here by populist mobilization against the institutions. The demand that the justice get out means they want him out of power. It's worth noting, however, that they called his expulsion by reference to his function. They scream, "Get out, justice," not call him by name.
Dr. Carvalho, last 2 minutes. I'll be very happy if you could just wrap it up.
I think I'll try to accelerate a bit here. So the idea is they are calling them out because of their function. So the protest is not against one justice only. It's a protest against the function, the public function, the institutional function of the justice and of the electoral court. And they go on, supreme is the people, meaning the people should have the decision, not the institutional authority that rules the electoral process. Of course, the people shall decide in a democracy, but according to rules and an organized electoral process. The claim supremes the people necessarily assume an opposition between the people and the court, implying the court usurps the power of the people. It does mobilize the people against the usurper, against the court. So that's the general meaning of that claim, of that slogan. And so I have a little more interpretation here, but the idea, I think, is already clear. The idea is how they try to mobilize the people against the institutions and make it in the name of democracy, in the name of a more democratic, supposedly more democratic democracy, so to say, that would be freer, that would be more fair, that will not be rigid and controlled by a corrupt elite. So I will stop here. I think I've already made my point. I can speak a little more in the discussion. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's interesting that both your and Jonathan's talks are kind of overlapping in terms of weaponizing democracy against democracy, which I found really interesting. Well, we'll move on to our next presenter, Dr. Andreea Zamfira. from University of Bucharest, and her talk is Daniel Barber's and Peter Mayer's theoretical perspectives on politics and post-democracy. Dr. Zamfira, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kaya. I want to ask you, if possible, to share the document I have sent to you on chat.
Well, I think Bülent can do that, right, Bülent?
It's just an image with the title and two photos.
Okay. So I should just download and...
If it is possible, I did it 2 minutes ago. Maybe it's more interesting to see the faces, the portraits of those people, of these professors I'm talking about.
Okay.
If possible.
I'll try to share it. Just give me a minute, please.
Yeah.
Okay. It's this one, I think. Yeah. Is it this? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Should I start?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, obviously, I will not be able to present a full account of Daniel Barber's and Peter Mayer's theoretical perspectives in just 50 minutes. Instead, I will try to offer a brief overview, highlighting some central ideas presented by these two authors. Although my paper is titled Daniel Barber's and Peter Mayer's Theoretical Perspectives on Post-Politics and Post-Democracy, my primary objective is to offer a broader analytical framework for the study and understanding of contemporary populism, which is the topic of our conference. I was very happy to find out that João Mauro Gomes, our colleague, works with this thesis. The crisis of democracy is structural, but I do not agree that populism plays with this crisis. Yes, populism plays with this crisis, but my question is which populism? Which populism? The democratic populism or the anti-democratic populism? I think very interesting discussions we can have, and we can continue these discussions even after our workshop. So I try to continue a bit the ideas developed by my colleague. In Romania, which is my main field of investigation, but of course not only in Romania, public debates, but also academic debates on populism have become increasingly confused. We know that populism can be analyzed from multiple angles: ideological, strategic, discursive, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, we are witnessing a blurring of meanings, which doesn't seem to me accidental, between democratic populism and strategic populism, populism as a manner of communication and manipulation. So I do introduce this accent on the separation between ideological populism and strategic populism. Ideological populism, it can be understood as a legitimate form of reclaiming political agency and representation of the people. It is ontologically grounded in what we can call democratic ethos. And I have with me a quotation, a very interesting quotation coming from Pierre Rozan-Vallon, a French political scientist, who wrote, "Although it is often criticized for its authoritarian and anti-pluralist tendencies, populism can also represent a form of democratic correction by drawing attention to the deficits of representation and to citizens' alienation from political elites." Daniel Barber, one of my favorite authors, said also that populism can also be qualified as a preference for plebiscitary democracy over deliberative democracy. And there are also other authors coming with this kind of perspectives. So I have this difference in focus between ideological populism and strategic populism. In most cases, it contributes, in fact, both ideological populism and strategic populism. At times, sometimes they produce positive side effects. For instance, they can force sclerotic parties with a fractured connection to citizens to rethink themselves or to perish. This is a perspective or a point of view which does not belong to me. According to Peter Mayer, Richard Katz, Philip Schmitter, populism presents also good sides, could have positive side effects. It could be pernicious, but at the same time, it could be beneficial. I'm talking, of course, about the not about the anti-democratic positions, but about democratic, if you want, populism. Since I have not analyzed concrete cases and I have focused on theoretical ideas, I will make only one necessary remark regarding the empirical field. I have not taken into account strategic populism, which is present to varying degrees in many parties. And it is very, I don't know, it increased. It has increased alongside the spectacularization and theatralization of politics. There are a lot of scholars writing about these phenomena. My focus has been on populism as a set of ideas, on ideological populism, which is today embedded in many types of discourses on the far left, on the far right, but also within social democracy, conservatism, and other political traditions, liberal included. Populism, when it is not just an instrument of communication and manipulation, so democratic populism represents a philosophical or ideological approach, which offers a deeper view of legitimate power and democracy. It is a lens for understanding politics, legitimacy, popular sovereignty, or the sovereignty of the demos. This is a major topic in political philosophy. Well, unfortunately, as I have stressed until now, the populist strategy and the populist approach or the populist philosophy are very rarely discussed separately, and it is very difficult to do it, to separate them. And from here, regrettable confusions in the 2020s, a period marked by extensive writing and discussion on populism. Populism was almost universally understood, explained as strictly electoral demagoguery, and most often was associated with radical nationalist or extremist right, or with Eurocritical or with Eurosceptic positions. I think it cannot be properly understood unless it is placed within a broader context. And this, because this phenomenon of populism, of the rise of populism, is not isolated. It reflects a wider transformation that both Daniel Barbu and Peter Mayer have theorized. The passage from politics to post-politics and from democracy to post-democracy. My paper aims to explore how Barbu's and Mayer's theoretical perspectives can help us better understand the erosion of representative democracy in Europe and its complex relationship with the rise of what we call new populism. Well, who are these authors, Mayer and Barbu? It's time to say a few words. Peter Mayer, I think everybody knows him. He was an Irish political scientist, professor at the European University Institute in Florence, EUI. And one of the books I loved the most is Ruling the Void, The Hollowing of Western Democracy. It was published in 2013. It is a posthumous book. I believe all political scientists should read it as a seminal work. And Mayer's central concern was the crisis of democracy, the erosion of representation, and the withdrawal of citizens from politics. Daniel Barbu was a Romanian historian of art, political philosopher, and political theologian. The most known book of him is maybe The Absent Republic, published in 1999. This notion of the absent res publica refers to a democracy in which popular sovereignty is gradually hollowed out, because the state is not based on the will of its citizens, but on its own self-referential logic of power, logic of authority. And the result is a democracy, or regime which is called democracy, but in fact is largely formal and detached from society. Going back to ideological populism in Romania, and of course not exclusively in Romania, in recent decades, particularly in the years following the pandemic, the critique of populism largely overlaps with the critique of the opposition. Thus, the accusation of populism has become a political weapon. And unfortunately, in numerous cases, scientific analysis disregards the critical dimension of populism, associating populism a priori with a purely political strategy aimed at strengthening the power of a particular leader or party. For this reason, my paper also constitutes a critique of a part of the analysis offered by contemporary political science, and serves as an invitation to return to more neutral, balanced, and nuanced approaches. You might not agree. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I base my point of view on what I've read. The current state of affairs in political science, in the study of democracy, in the study of populist reactions, in my view, is unsatisfactory right now. And I base my point of view on Daniel Barbu's diagnosis. He presented, he thought, and he demonstrated that we assist to a transformation of political science into a discourse that accompanies power. So the political science is, well, not all the political science, but there are some important tendencies. The political science, which is not anymore critique, but it accompanies power. What about the critical function of political science? Barbu thought that political science should be, and I'm quoting, should be the critical conscience of democracy. Therefore, I think we need to rebuild its critical function. And here we are in front of the big picture of what happens now in our cité. Yes, so this picture, which is drawn by Meir and Barbu, of course, there are other authors that I could that I can evoke, Giovanni Sartori or Colin Crouch. They also presented similar explanations for what happens. So this picture is the picture. The big picture is the one of post-politics and of post-democracy. What does it mean, post-politics? Is briefly, politics without politics is the result of a depoliticization. And the post-democracy is a regime emptied of content, of substance. Populism, with regard to it remains generally viewed as a cause of the de-democratization, and almost never as an effect of de-democratization, of the crisis, of this structural crisis of democracy. Meir and Barbu they advance the opposite explanation. Populism, populist reactions, not the strategic populist, but the ideological populism, I'm talking about it. So these reactions, populist reactions, represent the effect of the democratization. They come with common observations, though emerging from different philosophical and theoretical traditions. They have identified deep and convergent transformations within European democratic regimes, both in Western Europe and in post-communist Europe. And their common diagnosis can be summarized as the deep weakening of the link between rulers and rule, between politics and society, leading to what Meir called democratic void. this is the name, if you want, of
Dr. Zamfira, last 2 minutes, just to remind you.
Well, I will try to do it. Thank you. So this picture has as background the individualization of society, the globalization and Europeanization. And what are the phenomena included in this picture? I think we are all familiar with them. The growing indifference toward politicians and their actions, though not toward democracy itself. The decline in genuine civic participation, the transformation of parties into electoral machines devoid of ideological content, the delegitimization of parties and other representative institutions, the deparliamentarization and the consolidation of executive power. The legitimation of non-political decision-making practices, and we have as examples in their books, European Union and the World Trade Organization, other organizations, supranational organizations coming with these practices. The depoliticization, as Peter Mayer argued, it means that decisions belong increasingly to public administration rather than to the political realm. Decisions are taken more and more about people who are not elected. The growing dominance of expertise at the expense of the popular sovereignty, the preeminence of market logic over constitutional logic and electoral logic. Votes count, but resources decide, explained Peter Mayer in a video which is available on YouTube for a conference at CEU. All these evolutions lead to what Colin Crouch calls post-democracy. It's a regime in which democratic forms persist, but the substance of democratic politics, the conflict of ideas, the pluralism, the genuine representation tend to disappear. The real power is concentrated in the hands of economic elites and large corporations. How did we get here? Well, without expanding too much on this point, the current situation can be explained following Erich Schatzschneider by presenting the evolution of, after the Second World War, of this tension between two conceptions of democracy, the pluralist and the elitist models. The pluralist conception rests on the idea of government by the people, whereas the elitist or constitutional model emphasizes government for the people, not by the people. And this second framework, second model, in this second model, representative institutions lose their centrality and elections no longer play the same decisive role. According to Mayer and Barbu, since the 1990s, the transition from this pluralist to the elitist model has become increasingly evident. And I can present some evidence of them. What I have to, in the end, what I have to say as conclusions, these two populisms are mixed up. Particularly when the model, the elitist model of democracy is defended, there is a tendency to accuse en bloc all populist discourses and to deny the legitimacy of voices that advocate for popular sovereignty. Populism and extremism are very different discourses. Populism and Euro-rejectant and Euro-skeptic discourses are very different, yet contemporary analyses increasingly conflate them, mix them up. So the risk here is to miss the object. That's why I think we should reclaim for the political science the vocation as the vocation of critical conscience of democracy. I didn't present everything I have in mind, but I had in my mind, but. Thank you.
We will have some time during the questions and answers. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation. I'd like to move forward with our discussants, and the first discussant is Dr. Amir Ali. Let's hear his discussions on the presentations today. Dr. Ali, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So let me begin by saying how much I learned by listening to these three presentations. What I noted was that in many ways, each of these presentations were kind of carrying the discussion forward in a certain sort of a way. And I was happy to note that. So let me begin with Jonathan Madison's presentation. This is the one that I read, and I can speak most about this. I couldn't read I don't think I received the other papers, but Jonathan's paper I certainly read because I received the paper, I think, a week ago. Now, I'm largely in agreement and sympathy with the many points that Jonathan Madison, you're making, but I do feel that you're putting too much explanatory weight on the liberal part of democracy. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because if you go back to an argument by C.B. Macpherson, the Canadian political scientist, he talks about liberal democracy as a hyphenated idea, whereby the liberal part of it hegemonizes and dominates over the democratic part of it, and in this way actually eviscerates democracy. Now, if one were to kind of follow that argument, I feel that what your paper is doing is actually setting a lot of store, almost hope, on the liberal institutions being able to redeem democracy. So I hope that kind of juxtaposing with C.B. Macpherson's argument that I'm trying to do brings out my concern about your paper and the argument and where I kind of disagree with it. Now, where I agreed with you most was on your point about how the difference between an established Western democracies and less established democracies needs to be collapsed. I'm in complete agreement with you on that one. On the point of American democracy, I would urge you to think about a book that Timothy Mitchell wrote just on the eve of the Arab Spring. It's called Carbon Democracy. And I almost feel that what is happening to American democracy right now in terms of the Trump phenomenon is almost a case of the chickens of democracy coming home to roost, because Mitchell's argument is that the American hegemonic project was all about exporting human rights and also exporting carbon copies of democracy. And we all know that carbon copies of democracy tend to be depleted and fainter. So in many ways, that particular attempt to export a particular idea of democracy is now almost, as the saying goes, the chicken's coming home to roost. So I would urge that particular point to reinforce your point about your observations about American democracy, which again, I said I'm largely in agreement with. What I thought your paper was missing in terms of its overemphasis on the liberal institutional aspect of democracy was the effects of social media, which I was happy to note that the second presentation by Dr. Carvalho did bring in. Now, I'm saying this because social media has really fragmented our understanding of democracy and has really hijacked democracy. Now, I wrote a book on Brexit, and I noted the role that Cambridge Analytica played in harvesting the data from Facebook and the Internet Research Agency, and how that kind of pushed the Leave vote. Now, I think that social media really represents an existential threat to democracy. I know that's a big, heavy word to use, but I am using that word with as much awareness as I have of the implications of that word. So again, I thought that your emphasis on the liberal institutional part of it was missing out on this particular development, the way that social media has completely saturated almost our consciousness. It's reconfiguring our minds and the way we think. Let me come to Brazil, which I don't know much about, but I'm very glad that you did mention Operation Car Wash. And I would like to make one observation on the basis of my country, India, which is that any self-righteous movement against corruption, which Operation Car Wash was, and that is backed by the corporate media, which again it was, will always lead to authoritarianism. It's almost like a rule of thumb. I say this on the basis of my experience in India. We had something very similar in the year 2011, which completely discredited the center-left Congress government and paved the way for the current far-right authoritarianism of the Modi government, which is ultra-nationalist and shows no signs of going away. You did mention the integrity of the electoral voting process that Bolsonaro kept talking about. Even Trump talked about that. Let me say from my experience in India, that we have a huge problem with electronic voting machines. Many of us have been arguing that they should never have been introduced. The old paper ballot should be used. Now, the leader of the opposition in this country is saying that those electronic voting machines are compromised, that they are actually allowing this government to keep coming back to power because there's a certain kind of a tampering. Now, again, this brings me back to your point about the emphasis on liberal institutions. In India, we have seen the continuous evisceration of constitutional institutions. The Election Commission of India, which was a very powerful body, is now a toothless tiger. In fact, it's a plaything in the hands of this government. So on the basis of my experience in India and the way that I've seen liberal institutions being eviscerated by this current regime, I'm a little skeptical about the argument that you're making about the liberal institutions being able to stem the kind of democratic backsliding that you rightly observe is happening. So with those observations, let me go on to Dr. Carvalho's paper, which I found very interesting. You begin with a very good central question, which is, why do people fall for the populist leader? And again, this is something that mystified all of us. I mean, in India, I keep thinking about what makes people keep going back to Mr. Modi and re-electing him. Similarly, what made people re-elect Trump after that that Biden interregnum? Again, the point that I felt where you were really putting your finger on the problem was the contradictions of democracy. Now, what I think, the point that would really re-embellish this particular thing is that populism really emerges from the cracks of the contradiction of democracy, not just democracy, but capitalism itself. Because what we see is that the particular populist construction of the people hides the contradiction of the increasing power of capital over labor. Now, this is the story of the last 45 years. I mean, taxation regimes, the Laffer curve. This is the way in which, labor is continuously kind of beaten back by capital. And I think that this particular continuous defeat of labor by capital, that particular contradiction which really people should be talking about, is hidden and papered over by this particular construction of the people. Now, again, when I made the point about the lack of the social media component in Jonathan Madison's paper, I'm glad you brought that in. But hear me out on this one. I think that when you talk about the fragmentation of the public sphere, now, of course, that's a term that Jürgen Habermas uses in that famous book of his. It doesn't really capture what social media is doing to the public sphere. In fact, just to kind of help you think along this process, I would suggest that what social media has done is to literally smash into smithereens the public sphere. And because we have this kind of a smashing into smithereens of the public sphere, the very possibility of a genuine politics, where politics acts as this bringing people together as a collective, to be able to collectively articulate their positions, is completely eviscerated. Now, on that basis, let me move on to the next paper, which I found very, very interesting, Dr. Andreea Zamfira's paper. I began by disagreeing with your paper, Dr. Zamfira, but then I ended up agreeing with a lot of what you said at the end. Now, let me point out where I disagreed. My disagreement was on your idea that there can be a good populism and a bad populism. I think if it's a good left-wing populism, it will result in authoritarianism. If it's a bad right-wing populism, it will result in authoritarianism. I mean, democratic backsliding seems to be the very nature of populism. It will lead to that. I mean, again, I say this from my Indian experience. In the early 1970s, before I was born, actually, or around the time that I was born, we had Mrs. Gandhi, who was a left-wing populist leader, and she imposed the emergency. So I don't really see the possibility of a good populism, although I might be missing something, and I would be happy to hear more from you. I do promise you that I will read these two scholars that you mentioned, Peter Mayer and the other one whose name is, and this would be the biggest takeaway from me, from your paper. But let me quickly make 2 or 3 more points. The pandemic and the populist is an important thing, because ultimately what the pandemic did was that it revealed to us how badly the populist manages the pandemic. And the pandemic was used by populists to reinforce their authoritarianism. Your points on political science and the state of the discipline were very, very provocative, and they really made me think. I think as political scientists, we should really be agonizing over the very bad state of this discipline. And my answer has always been a very traditional Aristotelian one of bringing back politics as a master science, because it is precisely this dislodging of politics as master science by the taking over of the technocratic and the economic that has resulted in the kind of populism that we are witnessing. So perhaps one way of countering populism is, let's reread Aristotle all over again, Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, where politics is a master science because its ends encompass the ends of all other activities in society. I'll stop there. I hope I haven't overshot my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was really interesting. Thank you. Can we go on with the next one? Dr. Amedeo Varriale, can we go with you just to finish up? Yeah.
Sure thing. Okay, so first and foremost, thank you, Bulent, and everyone else at ECPS for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this stimulating and intellectual discussion today. And thank you for all the great presentations. Starting with Dr. Madison's work, which as it's the same for me as Dr. Amir Ali, Dr. Ali mentioned, it was the only paper that I actually received, so I was able to read. My comments on the other papers will be a little bit more generic. So starting with Dr. Madison's work, as far as I understand, the paper argues that liberal institutions in Brazil were more effective than liberal institutions in the United States in utilizing checks and balances to intervene against populist leaders with authoritarian tendencies to prevent democratic backsliding. I think in my opinion, the very strength of Dr. Madison's work is that it actually provides numerous examples that are, in my opinion, objective facts, thus essentially very impossible to dispute, such as Trump's occasional partisan use of independent bodies or executive overreaches like emergency decrees, executive orders, and Bolsonaro's arguably anti-constitutional behavior and often circumventing Congress. So with that paper, an important contribution to the existing academic literature is made, because unlike developmental approaches, I think that's what he called them, are his approach empirically aims to show that it is the function of liberal institutions and not government performance or a country's wealth, or whether a democracy is consolidated or not, that actually determines whether it is successful in countering populist authoritarianism. As a qualitative ideational scholar, I appreciated the analytical framework, methodology and structure and flow of the paper, and was fascinated by examples such as Trump's pressure on the Department of Justice, or Bolsonaro's medidas provisórias, provisional measures. And as we all know, those are all very problematic to democracy itself. So, in fact, I think it was Milton Friedman that said there is nothing more permanent than a temporary measure when it comes to governance. And I think the examples that Dr. Madison gave, which we hear about them, but we don't hear about them in such detail in the media and even in scholarship at times. So they allow, the reason why I liked that paper is because with those examples, they allow us to really understand populist behavioral patterns much beyond their usual antagonistic, vulgar, and people-centric or anti-immigrant appeals. So Dr. Madison's work goes to the core of how actors like Trump, either within or outside legal boundaries, tamper with liberal aspects of democracy. And I think that scholarship today should actually focus more on what Trump does rather than on what he says, so which is more important. That said, I would also want to make a related point to perhaps spark a future discussion. I think it's interesting how the American right under Trump has almost completely shifted from a liberal or a libertarian conservatism to populist crypto authoritarianism. The grand old party is only the shadow of what it used to be, once a party that endorsed Reaganomics, free markets, democratic civic patriotism, individual rights, and viewed immigration as an overall positive phenomenon when controlled, shifted to an aggressive form of protectionism, a conspiratorial, paranoid style of politics, and xenophobic anti-immigrationism, which also marginalized moderate, middle-class, conservative, and liberal voters. So, and although there are still, of course, voices within or close to the Republican Party, such as there have been voices, anti-Trump voices in the Republican Party, like Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Bill Kristol, and perhaps even Rand Paul. Trump's tendencies are actually more similar to those of authoritarians on the far left in Latin America, like Chavez, Maduro, Perón in the past, than to those of his Republican predecessors like Bush Sr. or Ronald Reagan. And this is quite worrying for many. And last point on the states, the challenge and problem I think we face in the, and Dr. Madison's paper made me think of this a lot, is that the future of America is so, America today, sorry, is so divided and polarized with the hard right and the hard left that centrism, classical liberalism, and social democracy have almost completely disappeared. And there will hardly be, at least from my point of view, an anti-populist consensus politics, to borrow a term from the scholar Benjamin Moffat, again in a country with 342 million different people, and where demographics and lifestyles in large metropolitan centers like New York and LA are completely distinct from those of rural America, the Rust Belt, the Bible Belt, etc. So I don't see how such a divided and polarized country can unfortunately continue to be the leader of a free world in an already multipolar world today. And there is no guarantee that after Trump, there won't be another Trump or even much worse than Trump. So in any case, moving on to the next presentations, one by Dr. Gomes, Vieira de Carvalho and Dr. Zamfira. I found them captivating, and it made me think about some of the work by scholars like William Galston, which in some ways is similar to that of Peter Mayer. I know less of Daniel Barbu, unfortunately, but it was very interesting to hear about it. And I think there is this central idea that we are sort of going around, but to just get to the core of it, liberal democracy, and this is a point that Peter Mayer made, has two pillars. And populism is very much dependent on and in favor of the first pillar, while very skeptical and at odds with the second pillar. Essentially, populists have absolutely no issue with popular sovereignty. Free elections and popular majorities elect their governments. They have no problem with that. But they do have a problem respecting the rule of law and are intolerant towards minorities. So they rely on charismatic leadership, as Dr. Carvalho rightly mentioned with Max Weber's definition. This unmediated communication to mobilize supporters. This works very well when it comes to popular sovereignty and giving the people a voice, but it does not work so well with constitutionalism and the rule of law, and which is also essential. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Madison. I think that's the main point he tried to put forward, that liberal institutions are essential and they are there to prevent ochlocracy, mob rule. So essentially the current populist zeitgeist, the so-called crisis of democracy, which so many of you mentioned, has a lot to do with this perennial tension between the popular pillar of democracy and the constitutional pillar of democracy. So populism is very much a reflection of this tension. And the last two presentations made me think of specific examples of how populist parties today pursue a form of partyless democracy, which is also a term used by Peter Mayer, often illiberal, anti-political, and anti-constitutional. And examples can be provided in the Italian context. In my native country, in Italy, the 5-star movement, which was also mentioned today by Dr. Carvalho, the 5-star movement wanted big decisions regarding the economy and other matters to be made through referendums, through direct democracy. And a few years ago, in coalition with the right-wing populist league, drastically reduced parliamentarians and had as its main objective that of the elimination of public funding for parties and of politician privileges. So the problem is, when you eliminate public funding of parties, often you get politics becomes something that only the the rich. Political parties become political vessels only for that rich people that millionaires can create. So, but of course that's also a contentious point that we won't get stuck on that. So, anyways, these are examples of populist anti-politics or unpolitics, which is a recurring theme in the rise of today's populist parties, which are actually anti-elitist, but they're also anti-particracy. So, and this is happening. Because, as Peter Mayer has explained, political parties, certainly mainstream parties, center-right, center-left, have shifted from society to state. So they are very good in their procedural, institutional, technocratic function, but they're not so good with their representative function. So this has, of course, led to the rise of populist or national conservative actors such as Farage, Le Pen, Meloni, who have strategically made this promise to take away power from the establishment parties to return power to the people. And I agree with Dr. Zamfira, where she said that, of course, historically, not all populists were bad. Although I would be cautious with distinguishing between democratic and strategic populism, which is supposedly anti-democratic. I think that's the point Dr. Zamfira was trying to make, because I think that all populism is crypto-democratic. So democratic to a great extent. However, it is also always anti-pluralist and usually illiberal. And both right-wing and left-wing populists believe that they and only they represent the true people. So they both exclude different segments in society based on their political views. But yes, there have been cases there where populism can have a more positive connotation. I will conclude with this point, especially in past totalitarian or authoritarian regimes, anti-elitist and anti-establishment movements, such as the Solidarity movement, Solidarność in Poland, or the Party of the Democratic Revolution in Mexico, have helped take down repressive governments that ignore the general will, the volonté générale of the people. And in these cases, populism's function was certainly that of a corrective to democracy, rather than something anti-democratic, full-fledged anti-democratic. Okay, so thank you all for the presentations. I guess that's it.
Thank you so much. I'd like to give a couple of minutes to presenters to respond these discussions. I'd like to start with Jonathan, if you have anything to say, or and also in order the same for Dr. Carvalho and Zamfira. Jonathan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciated the feedback, and it was quite interesting. I just would like to say, like, I do enjoy how much mine and Dr. Carvalho's work overlapped, because I do think that we kind of filled in some gaps for each other. And so particularly this point about, what is the role of social media, and, the kind of this broader context in which democracy is living right now is quite important. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know that I really have a whole lot to say, except that, thank you for the feedback, and I really appreciate it, and that I will take that into consideration as I move forward.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Carvalho, do you have any responses to the discussions?
I'd like only to thank you for the feedback too. I found all the presentations very interesting, and I essentially agree with the comments that are made, and they also give me something to think of and try to incorporate in my work in the ongoing research. So I would like to thank you for this feedback and for the all the provocative assessments and discussion. Not more to speak. Thank you for the opportunity also.
Thank you. Dr. Zamfira?
If you hear me.
Yeah, we do hear you, yeah.
Start. Thank you, Professor Amir Ali. Thank you, Professor Amedeo Varriale, for your comments, for your suggestions. I have taken notes. I have a lot of issues now for reflection, for future reflection. I try to answer in a few lines to each comment, to each question. I was very intrigued by this first concept Professor Amir Ali introduced populist construction of the people. I will reflect to this syntagm. It's very interesting. Yes, populism. It would be interesting to analyze populism as a reaction to capitalism and to the consequences in terms of the economic consequences of capitalism, in terms of inequality, for instance. So you do not agree with my difference between good and bad populism. You are right to do it. I didn't intend to introduce such a, I don't know, a moral hierarchy. It was just to simplify maybe the presentation. I think we can, well, it is maybe a happier difference between functions, pernicious functions or negative functions, and positive or beneficial functions for the democratic regimes. I have read some interesting text from Peter Mayer and Richard Katz about the beneficial functions of populism. Then we have to separate, it's my thesis, we have to separate between the different types of populism and the different context. About the pandemic, well, I don't know what to add. It's a very difficult period of time to analyze. I think populists managed badly, yes, this situation, but it was a favorable context for populists, especially for strategic populists, yes, but their reactions, in my view, were against pre-existent tendency in the political realm. Decisions were already more and more taken outside the deliberative sphere. So the arguments that were produced by the political elites were urgency, expertise, efficiency, and not representation. And I think it was a special context that forced populists to respond intensely. Well, I do not, I don't know, I do not advocate in the interest of populists or of the elites, of the elitists. I don't know. I'm just trying to explain the context. The political science, the third point introduced by Amir Ali, the political science as master discipline. Yes, in my view, it's it is vital, essential for this discipline to remain or to regain its autonomy. It's important to be autonomous. And these operations for which I advocate between strategic populism and ideological populism, these separations, in my view, are crucial. It is not easy to make these differences, but there are different contexts, different populist reactions, and we have to separate them and analyze them separately. Populism, in conclusion, in my view, and I base my conclusion on what I've read and presented, constitutes a symptom of a democracy without demos. It's a response to a representation void. And this representation void was created by institutions which are unable to meet social expectations. Regarding the observation of coming from Amedeo Varriale, populists have a problem, you have said, regarding minorities, their inclusion, constitutionalism. I wouldn't fully agree with this statement, but I will. I'm curious to find out more about this text. Yes, this is true that there are forms of populism which exclude minorities, which are anti-constitutionalism. There are some forms of populism, yes, which are exclusionary, nationalist, xenophobic, and so on and so forth. But not all populisms are built on this logic of exclusion. I think we can observe also situations when where populism constitutes only just the logic of articulation between the people and the elites. And I have these quotations in my mind from Peter Mayer, Pierre Rosanvallon, etc., etc. So it could be read populism. Some forms of populism, they can be read as in this logic of the articulation between people, the people and the elite. In some context, yes, the populist positions marginalize, silence groups. But there are also situations when they include marginalized groups in the definition of the people. And they speak in they populists, they speak in the name of the people. There are this type of situations on the empirical field. Very interesting, this example you have given with the totalitarian regimes, when the populist positions were, well, by definition, democratic. But I think today, if we do not concentrate only on new populism, new strategic populism, and so on and so forth, we can find populist ideas, arguments embedded in discourses belonging to all parties, even liberal parties, social parties, which are in opposition or in power. That's my I don't know, challenge, in fact, to find these ideas I don't know, developed in different ways. And I'm very interested to find out more about these forms of populism, which are not exclusionary, which are just with advance these new logics of articulation between the people and the elites.
Well, thank you, Dr. Zamfira. These were really interesting and fruitful discussions. I'd like to open the floor for questions. If among the audience they have any questions for the presenters or discussants, I'd like to hear from them also. Do you guys have any questions? I have a question, actually. Is there a certain context where these populist authoritarian governments mushroom all over places? Is there a period, a context that actually kind of infect other places, other countries, to adopt these populist, authoritarian, anti-democratic discourses and adopt in their own contexts? The question is for everyone, whoever wants to actually respond. Nobody wants to respond? Okay.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
could you repeat the question?
The question is that, is there a certain context where populism and authoritarian populism especially kind of becomes mushrooms all over places, like India, the United States, Brazil, Turkey, Hungary? What is the special context for this? Is it kind of infectious, where people kind of get inspired by each other?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll be very happy. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I do agree. I think there's a very discrete context. And if anyone would ask me, I'd say 2016 is a very significant year. That's the year of Trump coming to power, this year of the Brexit vote. 2 years before that, you had Mr. Modi coming to power. Around this time, I think, I mean, this is the time when in Hungary, Viktor Orban is consolidating his vote. So I think this particular very concrete context is happening a few years after the financial crisis. And the financial crisis, in my mind, kind of culminates in the kind of wave of populism that we see. Also, it's a threat to democracy. And the 2010s is perhaps the decade which really represents this, but which is really the nub of your question. So that's what I wanted to quickly say.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Dr. Amedeo is before me, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
So no, I completely understand your question. Now, I do think that certainly there have been occasions where populists have influenced other populists cross borders. Now, I'm no expert on Hungarian or Romanian populism. We had someone 2 weeks ago at ECPS workshop who was an expert on that, on Hungarian and Romanian populism. But for example, Orban, he was invited. Upon invitation, he gave speeches in Romania and some time ago, and not only to ethnic Hungarian minorities in Romania, but also people who felt like Orban had something interesting to say. Right-wing populists in Romania went to listen to Orban's speech, and since that happened, Romanian populism has also somewhat copied or imitated the tendencies in Hungary, also because if let's say, if from the point of view of someone in AUR, the Alliance of Romanians, if you listen to Orban's speech, you will probably think that you should imitate his strategy, because in Hungary, populism has been a lot more successful recently than in Romania, and also now it's growing in Romania to a different extent. But so populism across borders sometimes strategically can influence opposition actors in other countries.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And like, I mean, again, I'm not a global expert, so I don't want to speak too much beyond what I'm talking about. But like, definitely in my cases, like Bolsonaro was certainly influenced by Trump. Like he heavily interacted with him. His family was like always up there. There was just like, he's obviously influencing him. He's having a big influence in Latin America. But I think globally, kind of back to what Dr. Ali was saying, like, I think economic circumstances definitely played a role in like the financial crisis. And like, at least in the case of the United States, maybe less so Brazil, but like with kind of those economic circumstances, I think there was almost a jealousy amongst democratic populations to a certain degree of like authoritarian regimes. Somebody talked about like switching from government of the people to government to the people. I think particularly like looking at the Chinese and different more authoritarian regimes, some people thought, well, they seem to be weathering this better than us. Ergo, maybe I want a leader who will tell me what is best for, how to handle these situations. And so I think a lot of that, other people can speak to their context, but I think you see that at least in the cases that I know.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Carvalho, do you want to also respond? Yeah. Just please open your mic. Is not open. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Madison. I think the economic factor is important to understand that kind of wave of populism, and I think that there's two quasi-universal processes: the economic crisis and this digital social media. The digital social media allows that kind of imitation between the style of leaderships. So, and all a mobilization that is not only nationalist, international mobilization too. But how that quasi-universal problems are, so to say, solved, how they are elaborate is always national, depends on national circumstances and on national political circumstances. So I think I will try to think in from that point of view, how the universal is shaped in the national context by specific populistic leaderships, and that's why empirical analysis is always need to understand the phenomenon. But I think the two processes, digitalization and economic crisis, are essential to understand that wave.
Thank you so much. Selçuk, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for the fascinating presentations. I enjoyed them all. I want to ask Dr. Jonathan Madison, you mentioned the memory of dictatorship when comparing Brazilian and US democracies. How efficient do you think is this memory of dictatorship in consolidating the resilience of Brazilian democracy, apparently which the United States lacks?
Yeah. And so, I kind of skipped over that point just because we're running out low on time. But I think that it is very important. And like the Brazilian Constitution itself, the 1988 Constitution was written at the collapse of a military dictatorship, right? And so they wrote it very specifically and intentionally with institutions designed to prevent the regime they were emerging from. In my paper, I also mentioned that, because Bolsonaro, his memory of the dictatorship was that it was great and that things were awesome and that, they had a lot of great ideas that you should get back to, right? And so he really pushed that out. And so, I believe in 2020, 2021, Brazil passed a new law further defining what it constitutes a crime against democracy and, codified what it means to prevent a peaceful transfer of power or to make an attempt against a democratic regime. And all of that comes from a very real and living memory of the military dictatorship and of the things Bolsonaro was actively promoting as great. And so I think in that sense, that memory of dictatorship and the fact that, in the United States, people always talk about people have this idea of it can't happen here. Maybe they do or maybe they don't. But in Brazil, nobody has that. People know it can happen there because they remember it. It happened. And so that is really big in putting in more formal, like I said, liberal restrictions on, what can be done by somebody in power that could potentially threaten a democratic regime.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one question for Jonathan. And how is the Republican Party leadership constituencies are responding to Donald Trump's, George Bush doesn't approve him. There are a lot of Republican politicians who are sort of kind of against his, way of governing. And how do you, why do they let it happen? The Congress, the Senate, and
Yeah. I think Dr. Varriale and his comments kind of touched on this, that and I liked his point that Trump is more akin to Hugo Chavez than he is to Ronald Reagan or George Bush. And so and I think that's definitely true. And the other point he made was that you've seen kind of this shift from where yes, these centrist parties had developed a high efficiency at governing, let's say, but they had lost their function in representation. And so I think that's what you see a lot here is that they, George Bush and Mitt Romney and these people who don't like Donald Trump in the Republican Party, they just, whether they like it or not, they are not representative of where the Republican base is right now. And so their ability to do anything about it, to stop it from happening, is limited. And when it comes to people in the Senate or the House, like, they need to win another election, right? And so or they want to anyway. And so like they can't, standing up against Donald Trump has proven to be a losing strategy. People who did it aren't in the party or they aren't in politics anymore. And so you either get on board and that's kind of the point I made in my paper. In Brazil, you can maybe switch to a different party and try to build something up. But in the United States, like if you lose the ability to be successful in the Republican Party and you're a right-wing politician, you're done, right? Like you're just out. And so I think that really prevents them from exercising kind of a constraint on his behavior, even if they disagree.
But it seems the Donald Trump factor didn't work in New York City with Mamdani's victory, actually, against all odds, right?
Yeah, I mean, but New York City isn't really a right-wing stronghold of any kind. So I mean, Republicans weren't winning anything in there anyway. So I mean, Mamdani's victory, if anything, is like a defeat for like the center left or like the Democratic establishment. But I don't know how much it is a rejection of Donald Trump per se.
Yeah, thank you so much. Any other questions?
Amir Ali has raised his hand.
Oh, I sorry, this is
Okay.
yes, Dr. Ali.
Yeah, just one point. Jonathan used a phrase, "It can't happen here." It reminds me of a 1935 a book by the American novelist Sinclair Lewis, "It Can't Happen Here," where the central character is actually a Trump-like figure. So it just reminded me of that. And I couldn't resist raising my hand just to respond to that point Jonathan made. And that's all. Sinclair Lewis's book, "It Can't Happen Here."
Well, thank you so much. I think it's the end of the today's panel. I'd just like to say that all presenters were wonderful. Thank you for your insightful and thought-provoking contributions. I would like to express my gratitude to our discussants for their precise and illuminating assessments. And also the attendees, thank you for questions and comments. And we also like to invite you to join our next ECPS virtual workshop on November 27, where the session will explore rethinking representation in the age of populism. We encourage you to register and take part in this important conversation, and wishing you all a wonderful day. Thank you for being here today. Thank you so much.